My name is Margaret. I was born in a dusty little town, far away from the cities people dream of. My world was made of wooden porches, quilted blankets, and old gospel hymns on the radio. We didn't have much, but we had dignity, or so I believed. I never asked for too much from life. I didn't dream of diamonds or silk. I only ever wanted one thing: to be loved and respected by the family I gave my life to. I married when I was 17. It wasn't love. It was what people called the right match. One morning I was told to wear white and smile. That night, I belonged to a man who barely looked at me. My husband, he wasn't cruel in the way that leaves bruises. But he was cold, distant, a man of few words and fewer smiles. I spent my youth looking for kindness in his eyes. I never found it. Still I stayed. Why? Because that's what women like me were raised to do. You stay. You don't question. You survive. For the children. And oh, my children. For sons. Each one I carried with pain and raised with love. I fed them before I fed myself, clothed them before I got dressed, and protected them, even from their own father's silence. I remember their tiny hands, their giggles, the way they'd wrap their fingers around mine when they were scared. I would hum lullabies while tears rolled down my cheeks in the dark, careful not to let anyone hear me cry. Every birthday, every fever, every scraped knee, I was there. I stayed awake through the nights, prayed through the days, worked until my bones ached, all for them. And they grew, one by one taller than me, stronger, louder, and one by one they changed. First it was subtle, the way they snapped at me when I reminded them to clean their room, the silence when I served dinner, the rolling eyes when I asked about their day. I thought maybe it was teenage rebellion, maybe I was just being sensitive, maybe they were tired. But then came the moments that felt different. The way they avoided my eyes when I spoke, the way their voices sounded like their father's, sharp, cold, dismissive, the way they walked past me like I was the furniture. I would smile through it. I would say, "It's just a phase." But deep down, something in my heart started to rot. It was like watching a house you built with your bare hands slowly catch fire. And still I smiled. I cooked their meals. I ironed their shirts. I packed their lunches. Because I believed if I just loved them harder, maybe they'd come back to me. But I was wrong. So wrong. The house didn't just catch fire. They set it ablaze from the inside. And the worst part? They locked me inside. I should have seen the signs. Looking back now, all the warnings were there. Like whispers in the wind I refused to hear. When their father passed, I thought maybe things would change. Maybe now they'd come back to me, talk to me, be gentle like they once were. But it didn't happen. Instead, they got colder. They treated his death like a transaction. They divided his things. They argued over land, over a tractor, over tools, over pieces of a life I sacrificed myself for. I didn't ask for anything. Not a single dollar. Not even my share of the house. I just wanted peace. I just wanted to stay in the only home I ever knew. A quiet corner of the living room, my old rocking chair, and the photo of my wedding day hung above the fireplace. But peace wasn't in their plans. Soon after the funeral, things began to change in the house. Subtle at first. One of my sons changed the locks on the main door, said it was for safety. Another one moved my things from the bedroom to a small storage room near the back of the house. I didn't argue. I told myself maybe they just need space. Maybe they're grieving in their own way. But grief doesn't turn people into monsters. I started hearing conversations I wasn't meant to hear. Quiet voices behind closed doors. Murmurs about selling the house. About what to do with the old woman. I pretended not to hear. I didn't want to believe what my ears were telling me. But the day came. The day I stopped pretending. It was early morning. I was in the kitchen boiling tea like I did every day for 40 years. My hands shook more than usual that day, but I didn't know why. I should have known it was my soul warning me. They came into the kitchen, all four of them. Not with anger. Not with shouting. No, their cruelty wore the face of calm. They told me they had to renovate the house. That the storage room was safer. Just for a few days. They said it like they were doing me a favor. I didn't argue. I trusted them. God help me, I trusted them. They led me into that small room. They said they'd bring me breakfast, that they'd check on me soon. I remember smiling and thanking them, like a fool. And then, the door closed, and I heard the lock click from the outside. That was the last time I saw the light of day for months. The room was small, barely large enough for a single mattress and a wooden crate that served as a table. There was one window, but it had been nailed shut. The air was thick with dust and mold. I could hear the sounds of the house, but no one answered when I knocked. At first, I thought it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. Maybe they forgot. I knocked again, and again. I called out their names. Nothing. I waited an hour, 2. My tea turned cold. My hands trembled. By nightfall, I was still alone. No food, no water, no explicación. I didn't sleep that night. My thoughts ran in circles, trying to find reason in madness. The next morning, I banged on the door harder. I screamed. I cried. I begged. But no one came. Later that evening, someone slid a plate under the door. Cold rice. No spoon. No word. No face. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't a mistake. They had locked me away. My own sons, the babies I once rocked to sleep, had thrown me away like garbage. Days passed. Then weeks. I lost track of time. The room became my prison, not just of wood and nails, but of betrayal. I started talking to myself just to hear a voice. I prayed until my voice cracked. I cried until there were no tears left. I scratched marks into the wall to count the days. Food would come once a day. Cold. Dry. Enough to survive, never enough to live. I began to shrink. Not just my body, my soul. I asked myself every day, what did I do? Where did I go wrong? Was I too soft? Too loving? Did I raise them wrong? But the truth is, some hearts are born cruel. And some people wear the mask of family, while hiding the face of evil. One day, I heard them laughing in the hallway. They were talking about my jewelry, about selling it, about how much it was worth. I realized then that they had planned this all along. I was no longer their mother. I was a burden, an obstacle, a locked-away inconvenience. I was furniture in a locked room, not a human being. But even in that darkness, something inside me refused to die. Some ember deep in my chest still burned. Not rage, not hatred, but something older, stronger. The part of me that had endured childbirth without screaming. The part that had stayed awake with feverish children for nights on end. The part that had fed 5 people on scraps for years and never once complained. That part, the woman buried under dust and silence. She began to wake up. I started planning. I had nothing. No tools. No weapons. Not even strength. But I had memory. I remembered every crack in that room. Every sound in the hallway. Every pattern in the way food arrived. I began to test the door. Every day gently. Just enough to know when the lock shifted. I listened. I waited. I bided my time. Because I knew, if they were cruel enough to lock me away, they'd be careless enough to forget I still had a mind. And that would be their biggest mistake. The days became indistinguishable. There was no sunrise. No sunset. Only the dim yellow light from a single bulb above my head that flickered like it too was trying to leave me. I began to talk to the walls. Not out of madness, but survival. I gave names to the cracks. I greeted the insects crawling near my blanket like they were visitors from another world. Because when your own children abandon you, even a spider becomes company. I couldn't remember what my voice sounded like when I used to sing. I couldn't remember the sound of laughter. Not mine, not theirs. The world I had once lived in. The kitchen, the living room. The porch where I used to drink tea with my neighbor Alice. All of it began to feel like a dream I once had. What was real now was this. A bowl of cold food once a day, no human contact, a locked door, and a heart that broke in slow, deliberate pieces. Sometimes I imagine myself as a ghost, still breathing but not alive, still here but forgotten. And yet, despite all of it, I never stopped praying. I prayed not for revenge, not for miracles. I prayed for clarity, for the answer to one question. Why would my own sons do this to me? Asterisk. They weren't raised with cruelty. They didn't grow up watching violence. I never laid a hand on them. I fed them with love, not force. I protected them from their father's distance, from the coldness of the world. So why? What did I become in their eyes? A threat? A nuisance? An unwanted echo of the past? Whatever the answer was, I had accepted one truth. I was never going to be rescued. Not by neighbors. Not by friends. Not by fate. If I wanted freedom, I would have to take it myself. It began with the food tray. Every night, someone would slide a wooden tray under the door with leftovers. But one evening, and I'll never forget this, I heard the tray fall, then laughter. Two of them were outside laughing. I could recognize their voices. My youngest son Ben and my second David, the boys I once held in my lap. The ones I used to carry to church on Sundays. Now their laughter sounded like nails in my coffin. That night I didn't eat. Not out of hunger but strategy. I needed to be clear-headed. I started measuring the size of the room using my feet, my fingers, my memory. Every inch of that prison had to become my map. I found the weakest point in the room. A patch of drywall near the corner where moisture had softened the material. I began to scratch. With my nails at first. Then with the edge of the metal food tray. Every night after they had left I worked. Quietly. One scrape at a time. The progress was slow and visible even. But it was mine. It was my rebellion. My declaration that I would not die in this room. I didn't know how long it had been. Maybe 2 months. Maybe more. My hair had grown wild. My skin was pale and thin. My hands were covered in tiny cuts. My knees ached. My back burned every time I moved. But my spirit was awake. I began to remember who I was. I was not just their mother. I was a woman who had survived childbirth, loneliness, poverty, and silence. I had survived their father. I had survived the loss of friends. I had survived being invisible. And now I would survive this. One night, I overheard something that chilled my blood. Ben was on the phone. I could hear him through the vent above the door. He said, "She's getting weaker. Just a few more weeks and we'll have what we need to sell the place. The lawyer said once she's out, it's ours." That's when it all made sense. They weren't waiting for me to die naturally. They were starving me. Slowly. Quietly. So they could claim the house, sell it, and divide the money. I wasn't just a prisoner. I was a problem they were waiting to erase. That night, I cried differently. Not with pain, but with fury. The kind of fury only a mother betrayed by her blood can feel. And that fury became fuel. My escape plan began to sharpen. I stopped eating the food they gave me. I rationed it. Hid parts of it under the mattress. Stored crusts of bread for energy. Smuggled pieces of wood from the tray to sharpen against the wall. Every night I worked. Every night, I scratched and chipped and prayed. I counted footsteps. I memorized their schedules. I even kept track of which son delivered the food and at what time. And finally, after what felt like forever, the wall cracked. It was small, no bigger than a mouse hole. But it was open. On the other side was the old storage closet. Long forgotten, never used. If I could break through, I could crawl into that closet and reach the garage. And from there, freedom. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew I was frail. My muscles had shrunk. My bones felt like they might shatter. But I wasn't afraid of pain anymore. I was afraid of dying in that room, forgotten by the world. Remembered only as a signature on a legal form for the sale of a house. I refused to let that be my legacy. The night I escaped was stormy. Rain crashed against the roof like God himself was cheering me on. I worked until my fingers bled. Until the hole widened just enough for my body to squeeze through. I crawled like a wounded animal. I held my breath every time the boards creaked. I stumbled through cobwebs and darkness until I found the garage door. And by some miracle it was unlocked. I stepped out into the rain barefoot, broken but free. The cold rain hit my face like a baptism. I ran. I didn't look back. My feet tore on the gravel. My nightgown was soaked. But I didn't stop, because every step was a step away from betrayal, and a step toward justice. The road was cold beneath my feet. Each step felt like a mile. My breath came out in sharp clouds of pain, but I didn't care. I had no idea where I was going. I didn't care about that either. All I knew was I wasn't going back. Not ever. I don't remember how far I ran, or how long. The world around me blurred into shadows and wind and rain. Then finally, headlights. A car stopped on the side of the road. A woman stepped out. I must have looked like a ghost, drenched, bleeding, shivering, barefoot in a nightgown. She asked my name. I barely managed to whisper, "Margaret." She didn't ask anything else. She wrapped me in her coat and helped me into the back seat. She drove me to the hospital. That woman, her name was Cheryl, became the first light I saw in months. The nurses thought I was a victim of elder abuse from a nursing home. I was too weak to explain. My body had bruises, pressure sores, malnutrition signs, but the wounds inside were far worse than the ones outside. A caseworker came, then 2 officers. At first, I was afraid to speak, afraid they wouldn't believe me, that they'd go tell my sons where I was. But Cheryl, God bless her, stayed beside me. She held my hand when I finally told them everything, every word. From the day I was locked in that room to the night I ran barefoot into the storm. They listened. They documented. And when they asked for names, I gave them. All 4. My boys. Ben, David, Carl, Matthew. I stayed in the hospital for almost 2 weeks. They treated me for anemia, dehydration, and anxiety. But there was no pill strong enough to numb what I had lived through. The social worker said what I went through was unthinkable. But it wasn't unthinkable. It happened. It happens to women like me more than the world wants to admit. Mothers, grandmothers, elders discarded like worn-out shoes the moment were no longer useful. But I wasn't going to be silent anymore. For every mother out there who's ever been betrayed, abandoned, ignored, I was going to speak. After my release, Cheryl let me stay with her temporarily, just until I found a safer place. I remember sitting at her kitchen table one morning. The sunlight hit my face. It was warm. I cried, not because I was in pain, but because it was the first time I felt human again. A real person. Seen. Heard. Alive. We filed for a restraining order. The officers went to my old house. I don't know what their faces looked like when they realized I had survived. I don't want to know. But I know one thing. They didn't expect me to make it out. They expected me to die in that room. They were already planning how to sell the house, how to split the money, how to erase me from their lives like a smudge on a mirror. They thought I was weak. They forgot who raised them. The investigation was slow. There were interviews, reports, psychological assessments, statements. I had to repeat my story over and over again. Each time I did, it felt like reopening the wound. But I never hesitated. They had taken my freedom. They would not take my voice. One by one, my sons were questioned. They denied everything at first. Ben claimed I had memory problems. David said I was paranoid. Carl even said I had wandered off on my own and refused to come out of the room. But the evidence was too strong. The hospital records, the photos of the room, the scratch marks, the food trays I had hidden under the mattress, even the hole in the wall I had crawled through. Everything told the truth they tried to bury. Eventually, the DA pressed charges: elder abuse, unlawful confinement, intentional neglect. When I walked into the courtroom months later, I saw them sitting there, my sons. They looked away when I entered. They couldn't meet my eyes. And for the first time, I didn't feel pain. I felt power. Not anger. Not vengeance. But the power of survival. Of knowing that even when they tried to break me, I didn't shatter. I stood tall in that witness box. I told the jury what happened. In detail. I didn't cry. Not once. Because I had already cried in the dark. Now it was time to speak in the light. The trial lasted a week. The verdict? Guilty. Ben and David received prison time. Carl and Matthew were put on probation with mandatory community service and fines. None of them spoke to me again. They didn't visit, didn't write, didn't apologize. And that's okay, because I wasn't looking for an apology. I wasn't looking for their love anymore. I had buried that hope the day they locked the door. What I needed now was healing, not from the courts, but from myself. I started therapy. I joined a senior women's support group. I began writing letters, not to send, but to feel. I wrote to my younger self, the girl who married too young. I wrote to the mother who gave too much. I wrote to the woman in that locked room, who still believed she mattered even when no one else did. And then something unexpected happened. One evening, Cheryl brought over a young woman, her niece Amy. Amy was studying journalism. When she heard my story, she asked if she could write about it for her college paper. I hesitated, but then I said yes. Because maybe, just maybe, someone out there, another grandmother, another forgotten soul, might read it and realize she's not alone. The article went viral. Hundreds of messages poured in. From women, men, even young people. Some shared similar stories. Some said I reminded them of their own mothers. Some just said, "Thank you for surviving." For the first time in decades, I felt like I existed again. Not as someone's wife, not as someone's mother, but as me, Margaret, a woman who had been erased and wrote herself back into the world. I moved into a small apartment a few towns away. Quiet, safe. I have a little garden now. Tomatoes, basil, roses. I sit on the porch in the evenings with a cup of tea and watch the sky change color. Some days, the memories come back, the darkness, the silence, the betrayal. But I don't let them win. I look around at the life I built from nothing. And I remind myself, I walked barefoot through hell and came out stronger. So if you're listening to this, if you're someone who's been forgotten, silenced, hurt, or betrayed, let me tell you something. You are not weak. Asterisk, asterisk. You are not invisible. And you are not alone. Even if your whole world shuts you away, there is still a fire inside you. A voice, a soul, and when you're ready, not a second before, you will rise. Just like I did. People often ask me, how did you forgive them? The truth is, I didn't. Not all of them. Forgiveness isn't something I could just hand out like a glass of water. It's not because I'm bitter. It's because some wounds close, but never quite heal. Some voices echo in your bones for the rest of your life. I survived. But I didn't forget. I couldn't forget the sound of the lock clicking. I couldn't forget the coldness in their voices, the silence that followed my screams. I couldn't forget that my own children, the ones I raised, loved, defended, turned my home into a prison. But healing was something I fought for. Every day after I escaped was a quiet battle. Learning to live without fear. Learning to trust again, not others but myself. Learning that survival wasn't the end of the story, just the beginning of a new one. After the article about my story was published, a local nonprofit contacted me. They asked if I'd be willing to speak at a small gathering, a group of elderly women, many of whom had faced some form of abuse, neglect, or abandonment. I said no at first. I wasn't ready, but something inside me, that same ember that burned in the dark, told me to go. So I did. It wasn't a grand auditorium. No flashing lights. No cameras. Just a dozen women. All of them with tired eyes and hands that had held generations. I sat in front of them, took a deep breath, and I told them everything. The silence, the betrayal, the escape, the courtroom, the grief, and most importantly, the choice to keep living. Not just breathing, living. Some of them cried. Some of them nodded, like they'd lived parts of my story in different ways. When I was done, one woman came up to me. Her name was Ruth. She whispered, "You said what I never could." And I realized, I hadn't just survived for me. I had survived for her. And for every woman like her. That day changed me. I began speaking more. Not loudly, not publicly, but in rooms that mattered. Shelters, support groups, Senior centers. I became the voice I once needed to hear. I told my story not for sympathy, but for strength. And slowly, I watched it happen. Women standing taller. Women asking for help. Women refusing to be forgotten. One woman even left her abusive son's house and moved in with her cousin after hearing me speak. She told me, "If Margaret can walk barefoot into freedom, I can walk into a taxi." We laughed. Real laughter. And for the first time in years, I felt something I never thought I'd feel again. Pride. Asterisk asterisk. Not in being a mother. Not in being a victim. But in being Margaret. Just Margaret. A woman who crawled through her own grave and came out alive. And then one day, something I never expected happened. I received a letter. The handwriting was familiar. Shaky. Almost like the writer was afraid of the words they were putting down. It was from Carl, one of my sons. The one who used to bring me water after I'd faint in the kitchen from working too long. The one who once told me I was the strongest woman alive. Now he was the one reaching out. He wrote, "Mom, I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I've been reading your story. I've seen what you've done. I know I helped cause your pain and I won't make excuses. I just want you to know. I remember the woman who used to braid my hair when I was sick. I remember your voice. I remember your strength. I'm sorry I forgot it. I'm sorry I failed you." I held that letter in my hands for hours. I read it again and again. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat still. Because those words, they weren't a bridge. They were a mirror. They showed me that maybe somewhere in the wreckage some part of him had survived. Was it enough to let him back in? No. But it was enough to let go of the weight I'd been carrying. I didn't respond right away. In fact, I didn't write him back at all. But I forgave him quietly. In my own heart. Not for him. For me. Years passed. I aged. My bones stiffened. My memory played tricks on me sometimes. But one thing stayed sharp, my voice. I kept speaking. Kept writing. I started a small blog. It wasn't fancy. But it reached people. Thousands of people. Women from across the country began emailing me. Sharing their stories. Some said they were still locked in their rooms. Not with keys and locks, but with guilt and fear. Others said they had escaped, but didn't know how to rebuild. I told them all the same thing. Start small. Asterisk. Start with sunlight. With water. With a good cup of tea. Asterisk. Start with the sound of your own name said aloud just once a day until it feels real again. Asterisk. And then one day I did something I never thought I'd do. I went back. To the house. It had been sold years ago to strangers. The paint was different. The porch was redone. The rocking chair was gone. But the tree in the front yard was still there. The tree I planted when Ben was born. It was taller now. Stronger. Weathered by storms but still standing. I stood beneath it and placed my hand on the bark. I whispered, "We made it." And in that moment I wasn't a victim. I wasn't even a survivor. I was a warrior. Not one with weapons or armor. But one who fought with silence, with tears, with hope. One who rose from the ashes of betrayal and built something beautiful. So if you're hearing this, if you're trapped in a room, in a memory, in a cycle you think you can't break, remember this. You are not powerless. You are not forgotten. You are not too old, too broken, too far gone. You are a fire no darkness can extinguish. You are a storm waiting to rise. And your story? It's not over. It's just beginning.